Welcome back to February, the Fat Month. And I think of it as the Fat Month because, of course, you have Mardi Gras, Fat Tuesday, but you also have the Marché au Gras, which are the fat markets where we go to buy all of the ducks that have been raised for foie gras and preserving, making confit de canard. And it's really the time to do all of that because the ducks are fattening themselves up for spring, as they do sort of naturally, and then they are corn-fed the last 2 weeks to really give them that extra layer of fat. And that's what we work with. Now, I prepared some braised confit duck, and we'll talk about that in another video. But I'm going to make something special with the meat. It's a Parmentier de Canard. Now, Parmentier de Canard is named after Monsieur Parmentier, who tried to convince French people to eat potatoes. Up until that point, potatoes were thought of as not comestible, that they were poisonous, or they were only good for animals. They came out of the ground. And they didn't have the nutrients. They didn't think of them as a food for people. So he elevated the potato to the French culture and created anything that you see is à la Parmentier, or Parmentier means it has usually mashed potatoes or potatoes featured quite heavily in it. And in this recipe, which is a Parmentier de Canard, features some duck confit or braised duck or cooked duck, which is sort of what you do with leftovers, like a shepherd's pie or a cottage pie. And then we make some great simple mashed potatoes with a little duck fat in them to go on top and put them in the oven so they're nice and hot and crispy. And today I'm cooking this nice hearty meal because I have Steve with me, who's working out in the garden doing some lopping off pruning for the spring that's coming up. And it's always nice to share that meal with somebody, especially something warm on a sort of a damp gray day. Let's get cooking. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is get the potatoes cooking. I put some water on already, and I don't need a lot of water. I'm just going to have enough that cover the potatoes. These are nice, big, floury potatoes that will mash up really nice and absorb some of the fat. And I'm going to use 1 big potato per person. I'm doing this, I'm sort of tailoring this recipe to how many people are going to eat. I'm actually going to make servings for 4 because Steve is a hard-working doing physical labor, and that he'll eat 2 portions. I'll have a portion, and then I'll have 1 left over for myself. So it works out really great. You can just sort of say, well, I want 1 potato per person, like this, or 2 potatoes if you are a hearty eater. And then I can just sort of work out exactly how many I need now. So since I'm going to be, I've been going in and out and it was quite cold, I finally got a fire going. I'm going to go ahead and put my apron on. And let you just sort of enjoy my beautiful duck up here, which was one of the original 1970s tea towels that my good neighbors on the farm gave me as a welcoming present to Camont. They've been hanging over this kitchen for all these years, keeping an eye on how I cook. So make sure when you're choosing potatoes for a dish like this, where you're going to mash up the potatoes, that they are floury, starchy. These are charlottes, which were last season's potatoes, so they've kind of acquired a nice starchiness that as they cook, they sort of fall apart, and they'll absorb liquid, like we'll add in butter, cream, or duck fat. You might, if you're in North America, you'd be looking at a russet, an Idaho baked potato kind of potato, Yukon Gold. Of course, there's so many different kinds of varieties now that's exactly what we want to hear.
When a recipe is as simple as something as 2 ingredients, the duck and the potatoes, then you really have to pay attention to how good those ingredients are. Now, I really am talking about these potatoes because they're the first thing you eat when you dip your fork into the mound of hot, steamy potatoes. They have to taste delicious. And you can't just keep adding things. They have to be good to start with. So paying attention to your raw ingredient is the most important part of cooking here in France. So if you can't get any good potatoes today and you want to make this dish, what about using celery root and apples? Or maybe a sweet potato puree? Always go to your raw ingredient and say, what's the most important part of any recipe? It's the food that we're going to cook with. So I've already got the hot water boiling. I'm going to cut these into small cubes because what I really want to do is get this lunch together in a very short time. The duck was already cooked. The potatoes just have to cook all the way through so I can mash them. And then I just have to put it together and put it in the oven for 15 or 20 minutes till the top gets sort of golden brown. It's a very fast recipe, and you can do it, of course, with other meats. A traditional cottage pie would be with beef. Shepherd's pie would be with lamb, of course. And so we might call this a gaveuse pie, which would be a duck, the duck feeder's pie. And just go ahead and cut these potatoes up into more or less equal-sized cubes. Now go ahead and scoop up all your potato cubes and put them into the water, which is only filled to about the ring you can see on the outside of the pan, just about 1 liter of water, so that these potatoes are going to be just covered. I don't want to heat up 3 gallons of water to cook a couple handfuls of potatoes. So the water's hot, and I'm going to now put it on the stove, and we'll get it ready to go.
So in this recipe, when you put in the potatoes to cook, you want to also put in some bay leaf. And I use fresh bay leaf because I got a bay tree right outside the kitchen door. And it's so pungent and more flavorful than you can imagine, because when you're used to working with dried bay leaves, you get that, they're just dry pieces of paper. They don't smell like anything until you actually cook and rehydrate them. And then those essential oils really start to come out, and they're quite fragrant. And then I'm going to use, it calls for half an onion. This is a small onion, so I'm going to put the whole onion in to cook with and flavor the potatoes with the bay leaf and the onion. This is a whole duckling that I've roasted confit. It's got 1 cup of water and 1 cup of duck fat, and then it was roasted, covered in the oven for about 2.5 hours, so the meat is all falling apart. And that's what we're going to use for the Parmentier today.
So it's easy enough when the meat has been cooking that long and steamed in a way because the lid was on it while it was cooking. It sort of roasts, steams, confits all at the same time. You can see the meat just falls off the bone, and I can just go in and pull apart the breast meat with some of that fabulous skin, just pull it off of the carcass itself. I'm just leaving it in the pot because it's very juicy and I don't want that to go all over my board. Pull the bones out, leave off those to one side. That'd be great snacking on later. And we'll just work our way until all the meat is taken off the bone. Now you can salt the duck ahead of time overnight, like when you're doing confit. Or in this case, I gave it a good salting and peppering when I put it into the pot with just a couple garlic cloves to cook with, and that's it. The meat is so flavorful from its own fat and skin that you don't need to add a lot of things to it. I think it's one of the things over and over again I say, that people tend to add too many things in to start with. We want the flavors to come of the actual product to come through itself. So you can see how easily all this meat just pulls right off the carcass, and all this little pile of good bones that went into that as well. Now, when you take off this whole piece, this great crispy skin is so nice. I'm going to just set that to the side because I'm going to end up using that in another dish. It's so delicious, all the little crispy bits. And I'll just break up the big pieces of the breast, the magret, into the bowl, and all the rest of the leg, thigh meat, and the wings as well. So once you removed all the meat from the carcass, and you can be more meticulous about this, and get all the little pieces from the neck, meat, in between the wings off. But I'm just going to go ahead and reserve the carcass and some of the bones for working with later, and just going to use some of that bouillon or broth with the fat to add into the sauce as we heat up the duck for the Parmentier de Canard. So here we have a bowl of perfect duck meat, tender to use for all kinds of dishes, and I'm going to use about half of it for the Parmentier. Now to prepare the duck to place at the bottom of the pan, I'm going to use a couple shallots. This is actually a large shallot, so I'll just probably use this one. You can use some onion or a bit of leek and anything that you want. I'm not using any garlic because there was a little garlic cooked in with the duck. So this I'll just peel and slice into fairly thick slices so that they can be cooked in a bit of duck fat in the pan. Don't be afraid to use thicker slices. This is not a super fine, refined dish. We want to taste some of these shallots. So in a pan over medium-high heat, put a little bit of duck fat, which came off of the duck in the roasting pan, with the shallots, and I'm going to let those come up and start softening before I add the duck onto it. Just a little tip on sautéing or softening the shallots or onions. Start with a cold pan and then bring the heat up. Then you don't risk burning or browning them too much as you're doing other things in the kitchen. And you can just go by and give it a little shake as it starts to heat up, and then they're not going to stick to the bottom. Well, it looks while I was doing this that I forgot to press recording about when I added the duck, but I'm doing it next and just putting it on top of these shallots. So the duck does go right on top of the shallots and starts to heat up. And then you can use some of the bouillon from the duck meat because it was still in the pan. Or you could use some white wine or a little water. But you don't need a lot of liquid, about a cup of liquid to get that started.
So I'm going to do something that's a classic little tip or trick with French cooking. Is called butter manier, which is to be mashed together. And I'm going to take some butter and some flour and mix it together, and we're going to add that to our duck mixture to make it thicken a little bit.
So about 1 tablespoon of butter, I'm using unsalted butter because the duck can be a little salty, and about 1 tablespoon of flour, normal wheat flour, all-purpose flour. And then I'm just going to mix those together until the butter absorbs all of the flour into it. It's a little messy at the beginning, but very quickly it will come together into a little ball. As you want your butter to be at room temperature so that it also is soft enough to mix up with your hands. You only ever need to do this as you use it. You don't need to do it ahead of time, store it in the freezer. It takes just a second to put this together and knead it a little bit, and then you're ready to add it into the duck mixture. And here is your beurre manier, et voila. So now all you have to do is add the beurre manier into the duck and the liquid and just give it a stir and let it thicken up a little bit before you put it into your pan you're going to put it into the oven with. So drain the potatoes. They're completely cooked, and while they're still hot, we're going to work them. Remove the bay leaf, but I'm going to leave that cooked onion in there and mash that into the potatoes, just using a little wooden paddle, a fork, or a spatula or a wooden spoon would work. And I just want to leave these in rough chunks. The potatoes are so smooth and floury, they're going to absorb some of the duck fat that we're going to add into it. And we'll just taste the seasoning to see how much more salt, pepper that we're going to need. Now, because I'm cooking duck-centric this month, I'm going to use a little duck fat. And this is a pure white duck fat that was left over from confit. And I'm just putting a big tablespoon into this. You could use some butter. You might use a little olive oil. I wouldn't use olive oil because of the flavor profile, but if you're adverse to using duck fat, I don't know what you're doing watching me here. But go ahead and add in a little bit of fat, some cream, some butter, maybe even a little milk if you need to, but just enough to loosen it lightly. Now I'm going to just grate over some fresh nutmeg, because that fresh nutmeg is what's going to go so perfectly with the flavor of the duck and in this delicious Parmentier de Canard. And don't overmix it. Just mix it together a little bit so that you've evenly distributed the salt and nutmeg.
So we just smash up those potatoes. You use a fork or a wooden spoon like I did. Add a little bit of nutmeg, salt and pepper, and some butter. You can add milk, but I didn't need to add any liquid to these. And I like to have them a little bit rough. And I'm going to now just build the Parmentier. You don't have to do anything in the bowl. Just put the duck with the sauce that you've made, and then put the potatoes on top, put it in the oven, and let it gratiner.
So I have an oven-proof dish. It could be any kind. I'm using a clay dish here, one of the not pottery dishes, and I'm just putting the duck and its sauce with the beurre manier, a bit of that bouillon, the shallots, and just put a layer in the bottom. It's very simple. Now we're going to take the potatoes that are still hot. So everything is hot, which is what makes this go so fast. From start to finish, you'll have this in the oven within half an hour, and then another 15 or 20 minutes in the oven. And I'm just putting big spoonfuls around to cover. I don't have to cover it. I'm not going to make it smooth. I'm going to make it just sort of a big pillowy piles of puree pomme de terre on top of it, and then we're going to gratinate in the oven so that it just browns by itself.
My left ear, my left ear must be bigger. It pops out more often.
Yeah, I know when you know, eating.
And the final touch will be to take a little bit of nutmeg, fresh nutmeg, and grate over the surface. If you want to add a little bit of coarse salt or some more pepper, but just for the nutmeg is good enough for me. And now it's all set and ready to go into the oven. It's still so hot, it's steaming, so it means there's very little time just to brown across the top.
So the Parmentier has been in the oven for about 25 minutes and we're ready to eat. So I'm going to take it out and you can have a good look at how beautiful it is. Nice and golden, all crispy. You don't need to add anything. No cheese on this. Let it gratinate on its own. The duck fat and the butter and all the good things. And we're ready to eat.
So nothing like a hot bowl of steaming duck and gravy with mashed potatoes on top. A Parmentier de Canard, all ready for your dinner or lunch table, just like we have here in the kitchen at Canard. Hey Steve,
Hello.
how's it going?
All right, bit dirty.
That's all right, come on in, get settled by the fire.